Now, today, for our lesson today, we want to look at a different people group. We want to look at the Europeans. Now, objectives for this topic. We want to be able to explain the factors that led to Columbus's voyages. And specifically, we want to look at three factors: gold, God, and glory. And then we want to look at factors motivating Europeans to explore and settle the Caribbean. And we're actually going to be looking at factors that motivated Europeans to explore and settle in general, right? Up to the end of the 17th century. We will mention wind systems and ocean currents, as well as technology, trade, religion, and national rivalry. This is going to be exciting. I love it. Man, let's go. Let's get into it. So we see here a map of the world, and in our past videos, as you see indicated by the red circle there, we would have been focusing, our past 3 videos, we would have focused on this geographic area seen inside a circle. But today we want to take a boat ride. You want to take a boat ride with me? Let's go on a boat ride and let's cross the Atlantic Ocean and let's go to another continent. We're going over to the continent of Europe, all right, Europa. All right, so we're looking at Europe now, and today's lesson is we're going to look at a series of interesting events, intertwining events that are going to lead to the genesis of Caribbean history as we know it. All right. Now, first of all, our story begins in 15th century Europe. And if you wonder when was the 15th century, that would have been in the 1400s. All right. We want to look at a few things that was occurring in 15th century Europe. Was it the same as it is today? We want to look firstly at how European society was in the 15th century or the 1400s. Now, European countries, they had a hierarchical system or society where everyone was seen as being subordinate to some superior authority. There was kings, there were kings, correct my grammar there. There were princes, and of course there was the Pope, all right? Now, European, the term European, it is frequently used by us when we study history and by historians, but it was not a term that anyone referred to themselves as. They were more nationalist. So, for example, a man living in London, he was seen as an Englishman. A woman living in France was seen as a French woman. You get the point. They were more nationalists, but they did not observe themselves collectively as being European. Oh, we are European, all right? Now, women were mostly considered weak and inferior to men, with few exceptions. These exceptions would have occurred in royalty, of course, and large sections of the population were illiterate, especially women who were held in low regard. Now, although the printing press was invented in the year 1445, and you could see that the 15th century was a very impactful and historically significant year for Europe, where the printing press was invented in this year, only the rich could have afforded books, all right? Now, the educated populace, who were the minority, they would have been members of the clergy, they would have been pupils of such clergymen, or they would have been associates with the clergy. All right, so that's a little insight into society there. Let's look at religion, Europe in the 15th century. Now, in terms of religion, Europe had adopted Christianity, specifically Roman Catholicism. And the Pope was seen and revered as a supreme being. He was even revered by kings and princesses. And princes, I guess princesses too, but princes, all right? Christendom in Europe controlled education. Notice I didn't say it impacted or it was involved in. It controlled education. It controlled charity initiatives. It controlled administration. It controlled justice systems, and it even controlled the economic life of the continent. So this brings to memory the debate that is frequently held, where whether or not church and state should be separate or joined. In this case, it was heavily joined. and the church controlled these key aspects of European society and government. Now, the Ottoman Empire, we will be touching on this shortly, which was an empire created by Islamic Turks. And you see Turks, so you know we're speaking about Turkey, modern Turkey here. They captured Constantinople, and we're going to touch on this just now, all right, in the year 1453, and they conquered the once established Byzantine Empire. Now, the thing is, the Ottomans, they were Muslims. So they were seen as the only threat to Europe's Christendom. So Europe now was doing their best to greatly resist the spread of Islam that was being initiated by the Ottomans. We're going to touch on this very shortly because it is extremely important. The involvement of the Ottoman Empire is extremely important in understanding Caribbean history. All right. And then now, speaking about religion as well, we're looking at a situation in Spain and Portugal specifically, where in the 1490s, both Jews and Muslims were expelled for not adopting Roman Catholicism. Now, this movement was referred to by historians as militant Catholicism, and it occurred, it really was a chain of events that occurred from an initial retaliation to the threat of a group of people known as the Moors in southern Spain. And we're going to touch on this issue as well very shortly. All right, so let's get into it. Now, we look at society in Europe. We understand how European society was in the 15th century. We understand how European religion, what the religious situation was for Europe in the 15th century. But now we want to touch on the big one. We want to touch on trade. And this is where we're really going deep into the matter here, all right? So we see here a map of the world. In beginning this story of looking at Caribbean history as we know it, we're going to look at three countries, first of all. First one is China, second one is India, and the third one is Southeast Asia. Our story begins with certain products that these three countries are producing. China produced many products, including gunpowder, and the big one for them was silk. India and Southeast Asia, the big products for them was spices. So they produce spices. So they produce nutmeg, cinnamon, peppers. Those are the kind of things that they, ginger, those are the kind of things that they were producing. So we get that. Now, in the year 130 BC, the Han Dynasty in China created something that was referred to as the Silk Road. Now, I think you may have thought about the Silk Road before, but the Silk Road isn't just one road running from China, all right? The Silk Road was just a term that was used to refer to various trade routes that initiated in China and they spread throughout Asia going into Europe. Now, the Silk Road was various trade routes that the Chinese used to trade silk primarily, but along the Silk Road, the Chinese would have also traded other products, even gunpowder and all these other products. They would have even traded religious beliefs and philosophical thoughts and so on. So as a matter of fact, because of the Silk Road is the primary reason why, for example, Buddhism was able to spread from China to different parts of Asia and even into Europe. All right. If you notice also the Silk Road, it's not just running along the land, but the Silk Road also referred to the maritime trade route that occurred, where the Chinese use now to trade different goods and so on. And of course, not just Chinese, but you realize that the Silk Road would have allowed people groups from Southeast Asia and India as well to trade different products. All right, so this is pretty interesting. Now, in the 13th and 14th centuries, the Mongolian Empire arrived. Now, I want to show you something here. Going back to the Silk Road. The Silk Road, as you could see, it would have serviced India, Persia, Arabia, and it would have gone into Turkey, and then it would have begun to touch the area of the Black Sea, right here. And it would have also gone into Greece. Now, at this time, the predominant European civilizations in the year 130 BC would have been the Greeks and the rising Roman civilization. All right, I hear a little thunder there. All right. Now, what was happening here is that the Persians, the Indians, people from Southeast Asia, the Arabians, even the Egyptians and so on, most of the trading was done between them and the Chinese. The Europeans would have begun doing it, but not to the extent that they were about to do it. All right. And what happened here is that trade along the Silk Road was highly unregulated. So it just happened. They just traded, they did the thing, but there wasn't an organized system in place until the Mongolian Empire in the 13th and 14th centuries, also known as the 1200s and the 1300s. Now, when Genghis Khan started spreading the Mongolian Empire, we had something phenomenal that occurred here. The Mongolians, when they captured and they were in control of China, they obviously became in control of the Silk Road. What the Mongolians did now, they brought increased organization and increased structure to the Silk Road. So there was an intricate, organized system that was applied to the Silk Road, Silk Road, same thing, right? And this caught the attention of the Europeans. Now, it wasn't the organized nature that caught attention to Europeans, but it was the prosperity of the Silk Road that occurred as a result of increased organization that caught the Europeans' attention. So obviously now the Europeans wanted to be part of this. So that's when European nations really began using the Silk Road more often. And with the organized nature of the Silk Road that came about as a result of the Mongolian Empire, it didn't just spark European desire to trade, it sparked European desire to also explore. And this is now where we get to the story of a man by the name of Marco Polo. He's from Venice, Italy. His travels would have occurred between the years 1271 AD and 1295 AD. And as you can see, he would have gone into Arabia, then Persia, he would have gone into India, he would have gone into China, he would have gone into Southeast Asia, he would have gone into these different territories and he would have explored. And this would have been in the time of the Mongolian Empire. And now, of course, when Marco Polo spoke and wrote about these tales, this increased European desire to explore and to seek out the financial benefits of these trade routes called the Silk Road, collectively called the Silk Road. So his travels, but it was really that point that really boosted European desire into trading, into using the Silk Road to trade with these distant lands. Now, Europeans were trading with these lands before, don't get me wrong, but the use now of the Silk Road was encouraged even more because Europeans were actually trading these roads via the maritime borders, the maritime environment. So they were sailing, they were building boats, they were sailing there, they were trading with people in India and Southeast Asia and China. But using the Silk Road now was encouraged. So instead of building boats and so on, along with building the boats and traveling to these distant lands, they would have also traveled via land, via the Silk Road trading routes. All right. So this was an exciting time for Europe. It's a big prospect. They say, listen, we're trading. So it sounds like a beautiful story. They get to trade. They get to get these spices. They get to obtain silk. They get to obtain any other supplies that they need. Now, because Marco Polo was from Venice, Italy, Venice, right, became an important city in Europe in terms of trading with China, India, and Southeast Asia. So what happened is that all the commodities that Europeans needed, they were located in Venice. So the silk, the spices, cotton, and so on, they were located in Venice, Italy. So everyone would have traveled to Venice to obtain all the different supplies that they need. So Venice was a very busy city. Venice was a very rich city as well. As a matter of fact, fun fact, in this time, Italy was not a unified country. Italy was actually made up of several states. So Venice itself would have been not just a city, but Venice itself would have been a separate state. So Italy was not necessarily unified. All right, but it was made up of different states. So that's just a little like, additional information there, right? The goods that were sold in Venice were becoming expensive. And this is because they had to pass through many hands, many middlemen, as we would, that's a term we would use today. And primarily these middlemen were Arab traders. So what happened here now is you realize that the Silk Road rather, that is traveling across Asia from Europe, it's a huge piece of land. It's traveling across a continent, basically. And in traveling across a continent, what you will find is that there are many different trading engagements that would be happening along the way because it's a massive piece of the earth here. So, for example, if a European was trading with Arab traders in the Arabian Peninsula, those Arab traders would have traded with somebody in Persia, and the Persians would have traded with somebody closely in the Himalayas, and they would have traded with somebody in. So what happened is that you would have had different trading engagements all starting from China and permeating all the way over to Europe. But with more trading engagements and with more persons involved in the exchange of these goods, it meant that prices would increase because everybody needs to get their share. It's like, okay, if you go to a factory and buy something directly from the factory, it will cost you less than if you buy from a supermarket that bought the goods from a supermarket that bought the goods from another supplier that bought the goods from the factory. Because all those middlemen now have to get their piece of the pie. So then the commodity now would become much more expensive for you. So this was the situation for the Europeans, and especially for the people in Venice. Their supplies were becoming expensive. But guess what? The Europeans still needed these things. The demand escalated even more, even though the prices would have skyrocketed. Here's the interesting thing, though. Europe didn't really have anything naturally that the Arab traders, and they were the main traders in those days, they didn't really have anything that the Arab traders really needed. So Europe realizes, listen, we want spices, we want cotton, we want silk, we want gunpowder. So what do we have to give? Because even though Europe would produce certain things, most of these Arab traders would not have desired the products that Europe would have produced, or at least the Arab traders on the Silk Road would not have really desired those products. So Europe had now they had to find something that they could give to the Arab traders in exchange for the spices and the cotton and the silk and so on that they need. And that thing that they found was gold. Now, the thing is, you probably say, well, I don't get it, because Europe, do they produce gold naturally? So you're probably wondering now, if Europe doesn't produce gold, they need to find gold somewhere. And that is where now the Europeans would have gotten their gold from the Kingdom of Mali and from the West African region. The gold became Europe's currency being used to acquire these supplies from East Asia. The problem is that in order to obtain the gold from Africa, they had to also link up with Arab traders again. Now, it would not have been the same Arab traders from the Silk Road. So the Europeans now had to find supplies that they could trade with these Arab traders now, things that the Europeans could manufacture, that the Arab traders would be interested in, so that they could obtain gold, so that they could use in the exchange for spices. So what the Europeans did, they would trade cloth. They would trade salt, they would trade metals, they would trade pearls, and they would even trade writing paper because documentation needed to occur. So they would even trade writing paper so that they could obtain this gold. And then, of course, what they used to do later on, they would start obtaining slaves this way, as well as ivory and ostrich feathers for fashion and so on. So this is how the Europeans obtained their currency to get these supplies. So everything was good, the prices were skyrocketing, but there was trade. They were getting their spices, they were getting everything they need from East Asia. You see, indicated by the red arrows here, the Europeans started using the Silk Road via these routes shown here, right? They were able to travel overland straight to China. And some of them would have still used the maritime route through the Suez Gulf, but something was about to give Europe a really hard hit. And that something was the Ottoman Empire. Now, in the year 1453, the city of Constantinople was captured by Mehmed II, who was then ruler of the Ottoman Empire. Now, Constantinople actually was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire way back in the days, which was overseen by Emperor Constantine himself. And he named the city after himself. By the way, Constantinople is modern-day Istanbul in Turkey. And something interesting happened here. The Ottomans, they were spreading. They were spreading throughout North Africa. They were spreading throughout the East Africa. They were spreading throughout the Arabian Peninsula. And they were even spreading into Europe. Now, they were Muslims. And so their idea was to spread into Europe. And Europe began to panic because the Ottomans were Muslims. And the Pope and the very religious society, Christendom, heavy society that Europe was, they were very scared about the spread of Islam. So Europe would have tried their best to resist the spread of the Ottomans, but the Ottomans were growing. And when the Ottomans captured Constantinople in 1453, this changed world history like forever. Because what they did, the Ottomans wanted to take control of the trade routes, the maritime trade routes, because they had their ships and so on. They wanted to be the ones in control of the trade with India, Southeast Asia, and China. What the Ottomans did now, and it was really a measure of attacking Europe, is that they cut off the terrestrial Silk Road trading routes. So now Europe was hindered from obtaining supplies. And this was all strategic by the Ottomans. Europe was hindered from obtaining supplies from China and even from India and Southeast Asia. Because as you look here, the Ottomans control the Suez Gulf here in Egypt, and the Ottomans control this entire Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria area. They control almost the entire Arabian Peninsula. They control Turkey. They control Greece. So basically, and of course, North Africa. So basically what we're seeing here is that the Ottomans control most of the Mediterranean. And then they control the Middle East and North Africa, which means that the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, even the Black Sea, and that entire Arabian area, they control it. And that now was the main area through which the Silk Road was flowing. So it means they now were in control of the Silk Road, and they cut it off so that Europe could not have gotten any supplies. So guess what? The Europeans were in trouble. So it means now Europeans could not have traveled across these areas to trade with China, India, and Southeast Asia as they could have before. And you remember when they used to use their boats to travel through the Suez Gulf here? They couldn't do that anymore. So it means that the city of Venice, where all the supplies used to be coming into now, they were in trouble. And something had to be done. They were wondering, listen, we can't just go in because the Ottomans are more powerful than us. We can't just go in and say, oh, listen, we're just coming through. We're going to bombard and go over to China, India, and Southeast Asia. They couldn't do that. The Ottomans had the entire place locked down. There were rich investors in the city of Venice who said, you know what, we need to find an alternative way of getting to India. We need to find an alternative way of getting to China and Southeast Asia. We need to get our spices. We need to get our supplies from these countries. We need somebody who knows the sea well. We need a group of people who know the sea well, a group of people who could navigate well and find an alternative route for us. And that group of people were the Portuguese. So the Venice investors, they turned to the Portuguese. Now they say, oh Lord, listen. They turned to the king and say, listen, help us here. We will finance it. We want to find, we need this because this is for your benefit. This is for Europe's benefit. And Portugal realized this was indeed for their benefit. So the Portuguese took on the challenge. And there was a guy by the name of Henry the Navigator. He was actually the prince of Portugal. He was the son of the king at the time, and he was known as the navigator by the British. He would have done some navigation, and he would have sponsored some of these trips that were going to take place. He would have been able to use some devices and so on, and he would have helped in jump starting the initiative by even financing like the first one or two or so trips. He was even the one who helped colonize the island of Madeira. But the Portuguese began this venture of finding an alternate route to India. Now, this was their idea. And the main mission that the Portuguese had from the Venetian investors was to find an alternate route to the East Asian lands. Now, the Portuguese sought to do this by navigating mile by mile to the source of the gold and capturing these territories. That's an interesting thing. Why would they do that? Which means now that in order to find the source of the gold, they know they had to navigate the African continent. This is their reasoning. In capturing these territories that produce gold, they would have blocked much of the Ottoman gold supply because the Ottomans also obtained their gold from Western Africa. So this is the Portuguese. You know what? Let's go and let's just not navigate. Let's capture lands while we navigate. Now, the thing is, when the Pope heard this, the Pope was like, what? Are they doing that, boy? Okay, good. I approve of this because if you are attacking the Ottomans, you are preventing Islam from spreading. So that's why, for example, the Pope would have referred to them as crusaders. He would have called them crusades or crusaders. And they would have been seen as participants of crusades to help spread Christendom. All right, or to help the cause of Christendom, right? But the Portuguese got the ball rolling. They were, of course, probably the most maritime capable persons after the Venetians, but of course, the Venetians couldn't really do much because of the blockade that was created by the Ottomans. So it was really now up to the Portuguese, who were the farthest ones from the influence of the Ottoman Empire. So we want to look now at what Portugal did and their route that they took, because remember the aim is to get to India, right? The aim is to get to India, Southeast Asia, and China. How are they going to do this? Let's see here now. So the Portuguese, they left Lisbon, and in the year 1415, they entered into the city of Ceuta, which is in modern day Morocco, all right, in the year 1415. I hope I pronounced that right, all right? Then in 1434, they would have arrived at Cape Bojador. It used to be called Cape Nun, but they changed it to Cape Bojador in 1434. Now, it was around this time that Henry the Navigator would have then gone and colonized like Madeira and so on and so forth. And they were here a while. Then in the year 1441, they continued and they reached Senegal in the year 1441. Now, here's the interesting thing. When they arrived at these civilizations, they didn't just arrive, made port, and then continue. They would have captured them. Now, what the Portuguese would have done, they would have had ships with guns, and they would have been armed with even handguns and swords, and they would have captured these lands like this. As a matter of fact, it was even seen that when the people of some of these civilizations saw them coming with their machinery and their artillery, they were so scared they just surrendered one time. So it became a very easy process for the Portuguese to capture some of these lands. Now, when they arrived in Senegal in 1441, something very historic but sad happened. The Portuguese, in encountering African men, shipped 927 African men back to Lisbon, Portugal. These men were shipped as slaves. And when these 927 African men were carried to Lisbon, Portugal, and they were actually bought by the Portuguese and other Europeans as slaves, this began the first documented sale of Africans as slaves by Europeans in the year 1444. So basically, the slavery as we know it would have technically begun as early as that year, even before Columbus came. All right. But then the Portuguese continued on to Sierra Leone in the year 1460. And then some years later, in the year 1482, they arrived in Ghana and the Western African gold fields. Now, this is where they really hit the gold mine, right? Because they were able now to capture and control the gold fields of the West African nations. And this would have really hit the Ottoman Empire hard, all right? But we continue. Then they continued until they arrived in Angola in the year 1484. And if you know history well, you would know that Angola was heavily influenced by Portuguese thought and culture. All right. And then now, Captain Bartholomew Diaz arrived at the Cape of Good Hope in the year 1488. And thereby, it became the first time that Europeans were able, the first time that it was documented that Europeans were able to navigate the entire western coast of Africa. Now, they stayed there, and in returning now, the Portuguese realized, listen, we have navigated the western coast of Africa. So now we realize that we could actually go to India and these distant lands. Well, how? And we'll get to that part in a while, right? Now, we want to look at what would have helped the Portuguese to navigate these lands, the Portuguese and their technology in navigation. Now, first of all, they had advanced ships. Now, Spain and Portugal, right? Remember, both of them are maritime countries here, Mediterranean countries. They developed ships called caravels, and these ships had 2 or 3 masts with triangular sails at a 45-degree angle to the mast, and you see it here, right? And it also had square sails to the front. Now, this orientation of the sails allowed them to sail with the wind no matter where they travel. They always sail with the wind, all right? So they knew some good physics there. Then the ships had rudders, and the rudders could have been controlled by a tiller inside the hull of the ship. And this was developed to help maintain a steady course. So instead of rows or using rows at the side and so on to increase the speed and so on, they had rudders that allowed greater control and obviously caused them to have a steadier course. So this made navigation via these ships much easier. All right. The Portuguese also had compasses, and they developed a compass where the magnetized needle of the compass was mounted on a pivot in the compass bowl so that the compass itself would not fall into the sea, especially if they're going through rough waters, the compass wouldn't fall on, but instead it was very sturdy. All right, so this gave it stability. And they had other tools such as the astrolabe and the quadrat, and they used these tools to help them navigate via locating the pole star. They had maps and charts that were created by the Greek astronomer and geographer Ptolemy. And it was published in his work called Guide to Geography in the year 168 AD. Now, this work did not reach Europe until 1400 AD, but it became an inspiration and an actual tool for the Portuguese explorers. So they would have used these maps that this guy many years before would have created, and it would have helped them in navigating. And what happened is that they were also able to contribute and even change and edit some of these maps, all right? And then we have armament, and we mentioned this a while ago, where their ships were equipped with guns so that they could have helped them in conquering the lands along the West African coast. Sailors also had handguns known as arquebuses, and they also had their trusty swords, all right? Now, this is a picture of the astrolabe. I had to look back at the name. This is a picture of an astrolabe and a quadrat. Now, what you see in here in this picture is an astronomical quadrat, all right, using astronomy. But minus the device being on a tripod like this, they would have had something similar that was a maritime quadrant, all right? And it was used to help them navigate their way using stars and so on. So now we have an interesting situation where the Portuguese, they navigated their way around Africa. And in our next video, we're going to look at what happened after, what was the next step the Portuguese took after they realized, listen, we navigated the whole western coast. But we want to turn our attention away now from the Portuguese to an interesting development that was occurring in the year 1451 in another part of Italy, this time not Venice, but Genoa, Italy. In the year 1451, a baby was born in Genoa, Italy. The baby's name was Christopher Columbus. And Christopher Columbus, he grew up in Genoa as a seafaring man. He loved sailing. He sailed all over the place. He loved it from a very early age. As a matter of fact, when he was just 26 years old in the year 1477, he moved to Lisbon, Portugal. Now remember, if you wanted to sail the seas, everybody was going to Spain and Portugal, because those were the countries that were furthest from the reach of the Ottomans. The Ottoman blockade was still in place. And even in this time, when Christopher Columbus moved to Lisbon in 1477, what was happening here as well is that the Portuguese, what we just spoke about, they were still navigating. As a matter of fact, when he moved to Lisbon, the Portuguese would have been on their way to capture the West African gold fields. Evidence shows that Christopher Columbus would have sailed to Ireland, as far north as Ireland right here. And he would have even been on some of these expeditions that went to West Africa. So it means that Christopher Columbus could have been part of some of the expeditions that went and captured the Western gold fields, the gold fields of Western Africa. All right, he could have been part of that. Now, things are about to get very interesting. I want to look at some of Columbus's motivations. Now, first of all, Christopher Columbus, he was an experienced sailor, and he would have went on various voyages as far north as Ireland and to the Western African coast, all right? He was inspired by Ptolemy's writings in the same writings we spoke about a while ago in his book, The Guide to Geography, as well as the views of Italian geographer Paolo Toscanelli. Now, Toscanelli, he believed that he had a view that if you sail about 5,000 nautical miles, wherever you sail, you would end up in China. Now, this sparks something for Christopher Columbus, because he's saying, if I use this theory, it means that I could find an alternate route to China and India and Southeast Asia. The Portuguese, he knew the Portuguese were traveling along the African coastline to get to India and Southeast Asia and China. But this is what Christopher Columbus started saying. What if I sail these nautical miles in a different direction and I end up at China? Maybe I could find this alternate route and I could end up in China. So he said, what if I sail west to go east? So these thoughts really motivated him, and he said, you know what? I think I'll try this. But of course, it's not to say Christopher Columbus was a rich man. So to embark on such a task, he would need financing. Now, this is where we get to another part of our story. And we're going to go back a few years here in the year 1469, on October 1469. And something truly historical happened on this day. What happened on this day, and it happened in the Iberian Peninsula, specifically in Spain, where we had a wedding. And a wedding was going to set off a course of events that was going to lead to the introduction into Caribbean history as we know it. Now, this is how Europe looked in the 15th century. Now, you could see the Ottoman Empire over here. You could see that there are few countries that you recognize: Scotland, England, the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and so on. And then we see Portugal down here. But if you look closely, and let's zoom into this, you would see that you don't necessarily see something called Spain. Instead, we see 4 territories: Castilla, Navarra, Aragon, and Granada. Now, what happened here? Queen Isabella of Castile, of the House of Castile, and King Ferdinand of Aragon, they got married. And what happened here is that this marriage actually helped to unify Spain. It wasn't the only factor that helped to unify Spain, but it was one of the key factors that helped to unify these different states in Spain. And this marriage, it was about to change history forever. Now, first of all, the Spanish had an issue in Granada with a group of people called the Moors. Now, the Moors were a group of Islamic people from Northern Africa. And in the year 1492, the Spanish saw the eviction of the Moors in an event called the Reconquista, right? Now, the Moorish king, King Mohammed XII, who was also called King Boabdil, he surrendered to Ferdinand and Isabella on January 2nd, 1492. Now, the thing is, Portugal and Spain were at war, and especially in maritime expansion. Portugal was already exploring and capturing territory south in the Atlantic along the western coast of Africa. Now, this meant that Portugal controlled the gold supply that Spain desired and needed. Now, Spain was really caught up with a lot of internal conflict as well as conflict with the Moors. But after the eviction of the Moors, they realized, listen, we need to catch up with the Portuguese because they have already navigated the entire western coast of Africa. Oh my goodness, what's going on here? But then now, enter Christopher Columbus. Now, in 1484, some years before the Moors were evicted, Christopher Columbus approached the then King of Portugal, suggesting his idea of reaching the east by sailing west and inquiring of the Portuguese crown's interest in financing his voyage. But the Portuguese king turned it down. The Portuguese king said, I don't really have time with this. I am trying to navigate West Africa to get to India. I don't have time to waste on you, Columbus gone. So then in 1485, Columbus approached Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. But guess what? Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand at the time, as we would say in the Caribbean something, their head was hot with dealing with the Moors and with all kind of different internal conflict. So they didn't really have time with this. They wanted to expand, but they didn't really have time with this. Then he continued trying to seek sponsorship, even asking them multiple times for the next 7 years. His brother even went to the British, but the British turned them down. But then in 1492, after Queen Isabella had already dealt with the Moors and even the Jews and so on, she finally gave Columbus his feverishly sought breakthrough. So she said, okay, listen, I'm interested in this. I'm not too sure if you would do well or not. I don't think she told him that. She probably was very uncertain, but she wanted to expand and she wanted a way, because if she tried to go along the West African route, it could have meant chaos and conflict with Portugal, and that could have been very costly for Spain because Portugal had already put a lot of effort into conquering these lands. So for Spain to go now and conquer those lands, that would have been trouble. And that would have caused a lot of war, and it would have been expensive, would have been a lot of headache. But when Columbus produced this opportunity, Queen Isabella was like, you know what? Let me pursue this. This could be profitable. So Spain sponsored Columbus's expedition to the west, giving him 3 caravels. Remember, we spoke about the caravels of ships: the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And then Columbus was also to obtain the title of viceroy to all territories that he encountered, controlling their trade and shipping, and even pocketing 10% of their wealth. So on August 3rd, 1492, Columbus set sail from Polo, Spain. He set sail with 3 ships and about 90 plus crewmen. They set sail from Palo, Spain. They traveled to the Canary Islands, and then they would have left the Canary Islands, and they would have traveled until they met an island. They call it San Salvador, but the local people there called it Guanahani. And they arrived at this island on October 12, 1492. Do you know who Columbus met there? The Taino people. This then is the moment, October 12, 1492. This is the moment when the Europeans, for the first time, encountered the indigenous people groups of the Caribbean region. So we see here now, Europe had some reasons for their interest in this new world, or in their interest in going through this new route. They desired to find a route to India, China, and Southeast Asia. They had increasingly difficult land routes, which was caused by the Ottomans. They desired to spread Christianity. There were developments in navigation, and we looked through that, including improvements in shipbuilding. There was the Renaissance period where you had a revival of arts and a sense of discovery in Europe. There was the rise of mercantilism, where they desired to increase their national wealth via trade with foreign territories. All right. They desired glory, fame, and popularity. There was also vassalage, which was where you had only firstborn sons, they were eligible for inheritances. So therefore now other sons now saw this as an opportunity to acquire wealth, since they were not eligible for any inheritance. And of course, there was the rise of a new class of merchants and traders who are willing to fund voyages, not just overland, but overseas. And this now is where we stop here for today. But in our next session, we're going to look at the Europeans, and we're going to specifically focus on the voyages of Christopher Columbus. So this has been another session of Island Uplift History class. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you in the next session. But for now, class dismissed.